Hey folks, Paul here and welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at how to make a Bowdrill kit from scratch. I'm going all the way from me wandering around collecting the materials through to processing the kit and then finally using the kit to make fire. So I hope you'll stick with me and let's get started. Okay folks, so we're going to try something a bit different today. I'm going to try and walk around and talk at the same time. When it comes to looking for your Bowdrill kit, in this case, obviously you're going to have to kind of walk around to find the right materials. They're not just going to sort of land in your lap, so I figured we would try this. Hopefully it's okay. But what I'm looking for as I'm walking around is some spruce trees or some pine trees that have come down. So I'm in a coniferous woodland here, so the overwhelming majority of the trees are all coniferous, cone-bearing trees, so mainly spruce and pine. There's a few larch scattered around, and they actually make really good bows. So it's the bow I'm looking for just now, and what I'm looking for is essentially trees like this, where the trees have come down, the limbs are still standing, so they're out of the ground, they're still fairly solid, and you can see a lot of them have this nice curve on them, so the boughs often kind of sweep up the way, which is a nice shape for your bow. So I'm just going to do a quick walk around and look for something that might be suitable. In this video I'm not really going to try and make like the perfect beautiful kit, just a functional one, so it doesn't have to be pretty. But you can see these trees that have come down here. You can see the natural bow shapes that are in them, so it's just about finding one that will be thick enough to work as a bow. You don't want anything that's going to be too thin that will flex, so this for instance would be far too thin. When you put it under tension it's just going to break like that, so we're looking for something like that but just a bit thicker. So I'm just going to walk around, I'll find one that I think suits the bill, and then I'll bring you guys back in. Okay, so as I'm walking around here, although I'm looking for a bow specifically at this particular moment in time, it just so happens as I'm walking around I'm looking at all the materials that are around me, and if I find something that's going to work later down the line for my Bowdrill, then I'll pick it up. You know, if you're out looking for a Bowdrill bow for instance, but you just happen to come across like the perfect spindle, then obviously you're going to want to pick that up. So that's what's happened here. So I'm out looking for my my bow, and I have happened across a really nice spindle. So just the top of a tree that's blown off here, but you can see there's quite a nice clean, bring this in a bit closer, quite a nice clean piece of spindle material in here, or hopefully. By clean what I mean is it doesn't have any of these branches, there's no obvious holes in it, it's not wet, it's been up off the ground, and I like my spindles fairly thick, so this one's about the diameter of my thumb, let's say, and longer than my hand is the measure I typically go for. So although I wasn't looking for this, it's literally just sort of fallen in my lap, and it would be foolish not to take it. When it comes to looking for your materials for Bowdrill, Bowdrill's quite forgiving, especially here in the UK. You can get away with just about any wood, but you always want to kind of be using the softer ones, and something like this spruce here will work absolutely fine for a spindle. So I'm just going to cut this off just now. And again, I'm working with very simple tools here, just a saw and a knife. So the hope is that you can come out with just those tools and be able to make fire from the materials that are around. Have a look down it, make sure it's nice and straight. There is a bit of a curve there, but I can sort that later on when I come to take away material. Okay, so I'm back on the hunt for my spindle. Apologies, I had to kind of cut off there. There happens to be a group of people out with chainsaws just when I choose to film my nice quiet videos, but that's the way she goes sometimes. So I've got my spindle, I'm happy with that. The next thing I'm looking for is my bow. Again, if I happen to come across a piece of wood that will work for the hearth board or for the bearing block, I'll pick that up as I go along. So I've kind of already given you an idea of what it is I'm looking for. It's just a case of persisting and trying to find the right thing. It's worth taking the time to find the right piece as opposed to just using some big monstrosity and making life more difficult for yourself. Any time you use now to find the right materials will save you time further down the line, and it'll save you physical effort as well. So I'm going to carry on looking around. As you can see, lots of nice down trees here, so it's only a matter of time before I find something that will be suitable. So I'll bring you guys back once I have found that. Okay, so I've been wandering around for a little while and I have found a couple here that I think might do the trick. This would be one of them here. So what I'm looking for when it comes to picking a bow for my Bowdrill kit, for me personally, I like to have a little bit of a curve in it. I don't like it to be exaggerated. I think that's a bit inefficient, so just a slight curve. I like it to be fairly thick, probably about the same size as my spindle really, about sort of just the diameter of my thumb, maybe a bit bigger than that even, if it's a softer wood particularly. And I like it to be up off the ground. This is still a bit green. Ideally I would want it to be dead. If it's green, it's just going to have a little bit more flex in it and it's going to be a little bit more temperamental. Some people like that, it's just personal preference, but for me personally I just find it to be just another sort of variable that can get in the way. So the length of it, I like it to be sort of the length of my arm. It's important you don't cut your bow too short, otherwise your bowing action is actually going to be inefficient. So a nice long bow means you can get mechanical advantage, nice long strokes, and it will make the process much easier for you. Something to bear in mind is that when you're picking your bow, you want to try and find a light wood. Obviously you're going to be holding this thing at the very end, like this. You're going to be putting a lot of physical effort into this arm, and so if your bow is heavy and you're holding onto it by just the end, obviously that's going to start taking its toll. It's going to just tire you out that little bit more, and so if you can avoid that, then it's worth doing. And for me, the best way of doing that is just to use a light wood. So again, we're back out of spruce here. This is, like I say, a spruce plantation, so something like this should do the trick for me. So I'm just going to cut this, and when it comes to cutting it, I'm going to cut it as low as I can to the base of the tree, and I'm going to cut it sort of above or below one of these knots here. I don't want to cut it out in the open. I probably want to cut it just above one of these knots. The reason for that is as I go to tie my string into the end of the bow, it's going to have this big hard knot here that's going to help prevent it from splitting. So it's just something to bear in mind. So right there. And again, it's close to the base as I can manage. So there we have it. Got a little bit of flex in it, but it shouldn't break on me. Nice curve. I'll clean up all this moss and stuff shortly, but that's pretty much all we need for our bow. So now we have our bow, we have our spindle. The next thing is to find our hearth board and our bearing block, so let's go and take a look for those. Okay, so I've dropped off the spindle and the bow at camp, and I'm off now to look for my hearth board. Now the hearth board you have to be a little bit more selective with, mainly in where you find it and the condition it's in. So you want to find it dead standing, so up off the ground, and you want it to be completely dead. It can't be green whatsoever. That's not to say you can't do bow drill with green wood. I've seen someone do it as a sort of bit of a party trick, just to prove that you could. The idea being that the heat you're making with the set actually dries the wood out as you're using it, but it's ruthlessly inefficient, and so I wouldn't recommend it as a means of going about it. So we're looking for something that's dead standing or up off the ground, and we're looking for something that's very dead. And in these plantations, and we have these plantations pretty much all over the UK, so if you have them around it's fairly easy to find what you're looking for. You get a lot of what's known as windfall, where the trees, because they've got such shallow roots, come up very easily, and so you can find trees leaning against each other that have died, and they were usually more than good enough for doing bow drill. So I'll have a quick look around and see what I can find, and come back to you when I've got something I think will do the job. You can see hopefully a couple of trees around me that are dead and leaning. Those are the sorts of things I'm looking for. So I'll bring you back when I found a good hearth board. Okay, so I've been wandering around and I've finally found a piece that I think could fit the bill. You can see what I was talking about here, where we've got these windfall trees. The wind has obviously come along and blown all these down. So they're up off the ground, which is good because the ground is soaking wet. We've had a ton of rain these past few days. But I can see a couple of sections in here that might be quite nice for our hearth board. What I'm looking for ideally is something that's about the width of my 4 fingers. So that's my measure I normally use. There's a couple of pieces in here that I think might be quite good, so I'm going to take them. The wood here is pine, so our spindle is spruce and the board is going to be pine. Again, because we're in the UK, we're not using any exotic super hard woods or super soft woods. You can get away with just about any sort of combination. Like I say, the soft woods tend to be the best. So spruce onto pine or vice versa will normally produce an ember. Definitely not the best combination, but it's more than capable of doing the job. So I'm just going to cut a board out of here. For the board, I like it to be sort of the size of my forearm, and that just gives me a place to stand on when it comes to actually doing the bow drill technique. So far better to have it a bit longer than a bit short. So I'm going to cut this now. Okay, so this is the hearth board. It's a bit on the skinny side. I might just take that bottom piece as well, it'll be a bit thicker. So that's a bit thicker, and it might do the job a bit better. It feels a little bit damp. So when you're cutting these, a good way of testing to see if they're dry enough is just to put them to your lips. Your lips are very sensitive, and if it feels wet, that's normally the best way to tell. Looks very sketchy. Hopefully there's no one around watching me. But just pressing your lips up against the wood will tell you almost straight away if it's dry or not. And this feels dry to me. This piece that was a bit closer to the ground hopefully you'll be able to see there, but it started taking water up. And so I already know that's not going to be of any use. So little tricks like that just to test, make life a little bit easier, but that's our hearth board, and hopefully it'll do the trick. Like I say, it's a tad skinny. I want it to be covering that forefinger, but we'll see if we can make it work. Okay, so we have got the spindle, we've got the hearth board, and we've got the bow. The next thing we need is the bearing block, and the bearing block is quite important. It's one of the things that will cause your Bowdrill attempt to fail more than just about anything else. If you're having to use a wood bearing block, which is what you'd normally use when you're out looking for materials from scratch, then you want to try and find a nice hardwood, and there's a few sort of tricks you can do that will help the process, so I'll talk about them a bit later on. But you want your bearing block to be a hardwood and everything else to be a softwood. The reason for that is you don't want your bearing block to be wearing away at the same rate as your hearth board. Now, apologies, this isn't really a Bowdrill tutorial as such, so this might not make sense to some people, but it should make sense when we're going through the process. You just don't want your bearing block to be wearing away at the same rate or even faster than your hearth board. The reason for that is that's not where you want to be putting your energy, that's not where you're going to produce an ember, and so as little energy as you can put into actually using your bearing block, the better. So I'm lucky in that I know this woodland quite well, and I know there's a downed oak tree nearby that I can collect my bearing block from, and so that's where I'm headed just now. But hopefully some of you will have noticed as I'm walking through here that there's a lot of bracken. So you've got the new stuff growing up, but underneath it you've got all this dry, dead stuff. And I'm making a mental note of this just now because I'm going to need something to blow to flame when and if we make an ember. So again, as I'm walking through here, I'm not just sort of ignoring what's going on around me. I'm paying attention to the materials that are here that I can use, and I would encourage you guys to do the same. If you see something and you think that could be useful, then just pick it up, don't wait, because between now and me trying Bowdrill it could rain and all of that stuff could get wet. So just worth bearing in mind. Anyway, as I say, I'm heading over to this oak tree. I'll bring you guys back when I'm there and we can talk about what to look for in a good bearing block. Okay, so here we are. You can see the oak tree behind me here, and this came down quite a while ago actually in one of our big storms. It's quite an old fella, but the reason we want this again is because it's a hardwood, and so it's going to last longer when we're trying to make our ember. And what I'm going to look for is just down the bottom here, one of those sort of smaller branches that comes off, and I want my bearing block to be just big enough to sort of fill the palm of my hand. I don't want it to be so big that it's uncomfortable to hold, and I don't want it to be so small that I'm burning my hands. So something along these lines might be quite good, just enough to fill my hand, just like that. So I'm going to cut a piece off of a branch in here somewhere. I'm not going to use this one because it's quite old and rotten, but hopefully in here there'll be a few harder pieces I can use. Okay, so something along those lines. It's nice and fresh, there's no obvious signs of mould in it. Just big enough that I can wrap my entire hand around it and still have space here for the spindle to go into. And nice and hard. You know it'll do the job when it tires you out when you're cutting it. So that's pretty much all the pieces of the material we need to forage, so let's head back to camp and start putting it all back together. Okay folks, so we have all 4 of our pieces. And again, this isn't really a Bowdrill how-to as such, it's just me showing my process when it comes to going out into nature and selecting the right materials to be able to make a fire from scratch. So we've got a hearth board, again, a nice piece of pine, a bit on the skinny side, but I think it'll work with our spindle, which is spruce, and you can see sort of they're roughly the right size, so I think we'll make it work. We've got our bearing block that we've just went and collected, that's oak. And we have our bow, which again is a piece of spruce. So all that's left to do now is just to start processing these bits and pieces, and that shouldn't take too long, so we'll get stuck into that. Okay, so let's start with the spindle first. So there isn't a whole lot I need to do, just remove some of these bumps. Hopefully you'll be able to see there's some bumps on there that could do with coming off. We want the spindle to be nice and smooth, because if it's rough then it's going to tear up our string. And I know some of you have been waiting for the string portion of this video, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But just remove any rough spots, try and get it nice and uniform. When you're picking your spindle, remember to pick it with the knowledge in mind that you're going to be removing material, so you always want to pick your spindle just a little bit thicker than you might end up with when it's finished being processed, just because you're going to lose a bit of the diameter on the processing of it. Just using my fingers to feel for any rough spots. Constantly being aware of how it feels. You know, if I feel any moisture in it, then I know that it's not going to be any use, so I'm constantly paying attention to that. I'm looking for any signs of weakness in the spindle, any cracks, any bug holes, anything that might indicate moisture inside. But this appears to be a fairly perfect spindle. So next I'm just going to round over the edges here. Zoom you guys in a little bit. So we're just rounding it off so that it fits into our hearth board nicely. Doesn't need to be perfectly round or anything like that, just enough that it will actually bite into the board when we come to use it. So just sort of rounded. Apologies if I'm falling out of the shot here. And then on the other end, we're going to carve a nice sharp point. So the way I tend to do these is I do one side, rotate it 90 degrees, another one, and just keep rotating 90 degrees until you've got a nice square. Okay, so it's roughly square, and then you can start taking off the corners. That's just my process. I find that gives me a nice consistent shape. And then as it gets sort of nice and thin, what I like to try and do is use my knife and come in from the bottom and sort of scoop up. We don't want it to be tapering like this, so quite often you'll see people and they'll carve it and it'll just taper, just sort of straight up and down. What you want is for the spindle to be coming up nice and straight and suddenly going like this, and then your spindle gets nice and thin. The reason for that is if we were to leave it like this, what's going to happen is this is slowly going to burn down, and as it burns down it's going to get more and more and more difficult, and just as you're ready to make your ember, the spindle is going to be right back down to its fattest, and that's going to create more friction. It's going to be harder for you to spin it in the bow. So you want this to be nice and skinny, and you want it to be nice and long, and that way you're sort of dealing with the same resistance through the entire process. So I find the easiest way to do that is to come in sort of at 90 degrees and then really scoop, sort of put the knife in and scoop. And then just clean it up a little bit. Again, all the time you take in doing this now will make the process so much easier when it comes to actually doing it. Okay, and hopefully you can see what I mean there by sort of the spindle's nice and fat, and then all of a sudden it's just super skinny. And so for this, the duration I use this spindle, the friction generated at the top is going to remain the same. It's not going to get more difficult towards the end, which is what we want. So happy with that. That's the spindle done. Next we'll do the hearth board. Okay, so this is our hearth board, and not really a whole lot we need to do to this because it's nice and skinny. It actually means we don't need to do any splitting. If I had a bigger hearth board I would need to split it and do all sorts of complicated stuff, but because it's quite skinny, all we need to do is just flatten the top and bottom of it. I want it to be roughly as thick as the spindle is. That's sort of the thickness I'm aiming for. So it'll take a little while. I'll come back when I've got it finished up. Okay, so we've got the hearth board done. You can see I've flattened out the bottom, and on the top I've only really covered or removed wood on the section we're going to use. The place where I'm going to put my foot, I've just left the bark on because it's not really going to make a difference. So that's our hearth board. There is quite a lot of resin in this actually, which isn't something I would recommend. Resin, when it heats up, becomes a liquid, and liquids, when it comes to evaporating heat, is not a good thing. So it's just unfortunate this happens to be more along the lines of fat wood, but we'll give it a go and see how it gets on. I reckon we'll still be able to get an ember out of it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work on is our bearing block. Now, really not a whole lot needs to be done with this. Just find where it fits comfortably in your hand, like that. Turn it over and remove the bark on this side. The reason we're removing the bark is because the bark is soft and you'll burn through it really quickly. You want to be straight into the hard wood. You don't want to have to burn through the bark first. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to see there. You've got the bark on the outside and then the hardwood in the middle. And hopefully you can hear that. It is a nice hard bit of oak. And then, personal preference, some people like to have the hole in the middle. I like to have mine closer to the front. So all I'm going to do is take my knife and just create a little divot in there. And that's going to be where the top of our spindle goes into. So they'll fit together just like that. Okay, and now the last piece to the puzzle is the bow. And again, sort of minimal work here. I'm going to remove an area on one end for my hand, get rid of all the rough bark and stabby bits of wood, just so I've got something comfortable to hold on to. You can spend your time and make these really nice if you want to. You know, if you're making a set you're going to keep, but for an on the fly set you want it to be nice and quick. So just an area like that for my hand, and then I'm going to sort of clean up the other end as well, and that's just because I'm going to be sawing into that and I want to see where I'm making my saw cut. I want to get rid of any of these bits of bark or anything that will distract me as I'm using it. Not super necessary, but just a sort of a comfort thing. Okay, and now you may have noticed we've skipped over collecting anything for the cordage, and that's because when it comes to Bowdrill, when you come out into the woods, the chances are you're going to be doing it with man-made cordage. To do Bowdrill with natural cordage is a completely different experience. By the time you've sort of dug up some roots and twisted them together, or made a nice piece of cordage by reverse wrapping nettles or sinew, you're talking hours and hours into it. So for the sake of this video, we're just going to assume that you're going to have paracord on you, and if you're coming out into the woods and you've got the tools to make a kit like this, so you've got a saw, you've got a knife, then you should absolutely have a piece of paracord. It is just as important as a knife, having a piece of man-made cordage on your person. I always have one of these little lanyards attached to my keys, and that's kind of the cordage I would rely on if I came out and I was doing this. To avoid tearing that up, I'm just going to use some cord I've got in my pocket. Again, if you're coming out, you've got a knife, you've got a saw, you should have a piece of paracord. It's just one of the things. It should be one of your main tools that you carry. So to attach this, what we're going to do is we're going to use our saw. Because I'm rubbish at knots, I find this to be the easiest way to attach cord. And all you have to do is find the bow in your stick and turn it so that that's facing you, and then cut a notch into the wood. You may want to find somewhere hard to do this so you don't kind of cut your fingers. I'm just doing it so you guys will be able to see. Okay, and this is going to become the slot for our cordage. So I'll cut that in and I'll come back to you in just a second. Okay, so a bit of hard work later, and you can see I've cut 2 notches into the end here, hopefully. Just exactly the same on each side. Now, this technique is really good, but the risk you run is that it will split, and that's why we want a nice robust piece of wood. So all I've got to do now is attach my cord, and then we should be pretty much ready to go, I think. The reason I like this as a method of attaching cord is because you don't need to know complicated knots, and it's about as secure as you can make it. Like I say, the biggest sort of drawback to this way of doing it is just that you will occasionally split the piece of wood that you've sawed or sawn, but you can see there, just slides in, no problem at all. And then do the same to the other side. And the only knot I'm having to tie here is just a regular overhand knot. So I'm going to get my spindle and I'm going to find the right sort of tension for it. And then I'll tie that off. So I'll come back to you when I've finished the whole set and we can have a go at making an ember, hopefully. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to go. I have been out and I've collected some dry bracken from my bird's nest. I also managed to find some cattail heads, so we'll use them as a little bit of a boost. For the bird's nest, just a simple case of making a little divot with your thumb and squeezing it all together. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. And then we'll just chuck some of the cattail in there. And hopefully that will be enough to get us a fire going. So let's give it a go. Okay, so I'm not going to talk through the process too much, just because I'll do a proper Bowdrill video at some point in the near future. This is just to show you, like I say, my technique for making a functional Bowdrill kit from scratch out in the woods. It's not really designed as a good tutorial for people that are just starting out. That's something I'll try and cover at some point in the near future. So I'm just carving my divot into my hearth board that my spindle is going to sit into. And what I've got to do now is just burn the set in, and this will tell me a lot about how the set is working. So let's see what we can do. Just nice and slow, burning the two together. Okay, so we've burnt the two together. You can see we've got some nice charring on the end here. You can't really see it, but the dust that was coming out of here was nice and black, so that tells me that we're pretty much ready to go. All I need to do now is cut a notch into this board, find myself a little ember pan, so just something to catch the ember on, just a little bark shaving will do the job, something like that, and we should be able to make an ember. So I'll set you guys up and I'll see what I can do. Okay, so I'm ready to go. I've cut my notch, hopefully you don't see that there, and my bird's nest is ready. So let's see if the kit that we've just collected in the space of maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, is good enough to make an ember. Okay folks, so there we have it. Again, apologies, it's not really a full-on in-depth bow drill tutorial. Like I said before, I just wanted to kind of share my process, what it is I look for when I'm out wanting to make a bow drill kit from scratch. And again, this isn't a particularly nice one, this is just one that's been rushed together, probably taken no more than 2 hours to kind of go from nothing to a flame. So nice and quick, but very rough and ready. And that showed, and actually whilst I was doing the bow drilling there, I could tell it wasn't the best kit in the world, it was quite difficult. So I'll need to take this home and refine it more, but as a kit from nature, you can't really ask for more than producing an ember and making fire. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I will make a full-on bow drill tutorial video at some point in the near future where I'll go over all my little tips and tricks. But until then, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this one, and I'll catch up with you all again soon. All the best.